As it turns out, Pew Research says that 54% of Americans view climate change as a serious threat, mostly determined by what sports team you like best and how old you are. Don't bother rewinding, as the data reports that younger people from both teams generally care the most, while older Republicans care the least on average. Recently, Republicans had their first presidential debate, and the climate change question came up. So let's see what these candidates said and investigate the context behind their answers. Something to keep in mind while listening is that renewable energy has recently grown to supply America with more than 25% of its total energy. So if any of these presidential hopefuls win, it's very likely we'll see a reversal and begin using more fossil fuels going forward. So without further ado, here's the question that sparked this investigation.
So Alexander Diaz from Young America's Foundation has a question for you all.
Polls consistently show that young people's #1 issue is climate change. How will you, as both President of the United States and leader of the Republican Party, calm their fears that the Republican Party doesn't care about climate change?
This was a surprising question to hear at the Republican debate, but I guess that's just a sign that the red team is ready to move on from the renowned intellectuals who proudly present snowballs in Congress to prove that Earth isn't warming. Let's see what the candidates had to say in response to this question, though.
I want to start on this with a show of hands. Do you believe in human behavior is causing climate change? Raise your hand if you do.
Look, we're not school children. Let's have the debate. I mean, I'm happy to take it to start. Alexander?
So do you want to raise your hand or not?
I don't think that's the way to do. So let me just say to Alexander this. First of all, one of the reasons our country's decline is because of the way the corporate media treats Republicans versus Democrats. Biden was on the beach while those people were suffering. He was asked about it. He said no comment. Are you kidding me? As somebody that's handled disasters in Florida, you got to be activated. You've got to be there. You've got to be present. You've got to be helping people who are doing this. And here's the deal.
Let's just answer the question.
So is that a yes or is that a yes? Is that a hand raise?
You do not.
I think it was a hand raise for him, and it's my hands are in my pockets.
No,
because
no,
the climate change agenda.
Ron Desantis, the second place candidate so far, and notice how he did not answer the question and deflected to a talking point about Biden's poor leadership. He has a history of agreeing that adapting to climate change is needed. However, to my knowledge, he has never expressed that there's a need to prevent it in the first place. But on to the next.
Let us be honest as Republicans. I'm the only person on the stage who isn't bought and paid for, so I can say this. The climate change agenda is a hoax. The climate change agenda is a hoax. And we have to declare independence for it. And the reality is, the anti-carbon agenda is the wet blanket on our economy. And so the reality is, more people are dying of bad climate change policies than they are of actual climate change.
Vivek Ramaswamy, the third place candidate, also didn't answer the question. Instead, he deflected to the climate change agenda policies without actually clarifying if he thinks human behavior is causing climate change, and he clearly advocated for increased fossil fuel usage. So prevention of the pollution is likely not a huge priority if he were elected. It's still unclear if he's convinced or not, but his answer probably didn't calm any fears.
First of all, we do care about clean air, clean water. We want to see that taken care of, but there's a right way to do it. And the right way to do it is, first of all, yes, is climate change real? Yes, it is. But if you want to go and really change the environment, then we need to start telling China and India that they have to lower their emissions. That's where our problem is. And these green subsidies that Biden has put in, all he's done is help China. We also need to take on the international world and say, okay, India and China, you've got to stop polluting. And that's when we'll start to deal with
Senator Scott, are you bought and paid?
Nikki Haley, polling toward the bottom, but she gets props for going against the flow by admitting the bare minimum. However, the issue is that her immediate response was a deflection to other countries, even though the United States has historically emitted the majority of CO2 that's still in the atmosphere. And Americans emit more CO2 per person than either of the two countries mentioned. Time will tell if she's the Republican climate change candidate, but let's move on.
Scott, are you bought and paid for?
Absolutely.
Are you bought and paid for?
I'm sorry?
Are you bought and paid for?
Absolutely not. I mean, here's what the American people deserve is a debate about the issues that affect their lives.
Tim Scott, another candidate polling toward the bottom, but we were lucky enough to see an interesting Freudian slip, as this senator is the 7th biggest recipient of fossil fuel company donations in the 2022 congressional cycle. So he is literally bought and paid for, but he is on record in the past admitting that climate change is real at least.
If we want the environment to be better, and we all do, the best thing to do is to bring our jobs home from China. America has cut our carbon footprint in half in the last 25 years. The places where they are continuing to increase, Africa, 950 million people. India, over 1 billion. China, over 1 billion. Why would we put ourselves at a disadvantage? Devastating our own economy. Let's bring our jobs home.
The blame game was frequent in the debate, but as I said earlier, per person, the US pollutes more. But it's worth noting that China emits more CO2 in total, while the US is second and India ranks third. However, India and China emit so much because their populations are about 4 times larger than the US. But politicians try to trick people by conveniently discarding the population context. Also, it's worth mentioning Tim Scott is correct that the US has reduced emissions over time, but that's due to switching from coal to gas, along with increased environmental regulations. But ironically, Senator Scott's voting record is typically opposed to regulations of this kind. As a reminder, the question was how the candidates on stage would calm the fears that the Republican Party doesn't care about climate change. Do you think they made a good case? Let me know your thoughts. It's one of the most pressing concerns for young people in general, and those were the only people that said anything about climate change. And yes, I know the responses were clipped, but those were the highlights worth noting. The moderators also failed on this one and didn't stick to the topic for very long, so we don't know what everyone's official responses would have been. This debate review wouldn't be complete without the leader of the pack, Donald Trump, and his thoughts are...
Obama's talking about all of this with the global warming and that, and a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay?
He skipped the debate though, but we have a good idea of what his response would have been. Biden was watching too, and after the question was posed to the Republicans, this was his response. Chances are people still fear Republicans don't care about this issue, but ultimately, both parties suck, and everyone running for president is basically trash on the topic of climate change. Biden has passed some beneficial legislation that has supercharged investment in renewable energy, but he has simultaneously been approving fossil fuel projects at a faster rate than Donald Trump did. Many of you don't watch my channel for my political commentary, so rest assured that's not the direction I'm going. But if humanity ever wants to advance enough to become a Type 1 civilization and control all the energy on Earth, we're going to need some politicians that have future-oriented, sustainable energy policies. And as voters, we need to know what their plans are. I'm expecting to lose some subscribers since this was very political, but let me know your thoughts in the comments below and like the video if you learned something new. Or check out either of these 2 videos to discover more about renewable energy and the goal of becoming a Type 1 civilization. I'll see you in the next one.